They met on a rainy evening that seemed too ordinary to matter, the kind of evening people forget as soon as it ends. The city was soaked in dull grey, the sky hanging low, pressing down on the streets as if trying to erase everything beneath it. Water ran along the sidewalks in thin streams, carrying bits of trash and reflections of neon signs that flickered uncertainly. He stood beneath the broken awning of a closed convenience store, watching. Watching was what he did best. Not in the casual way most people observe the world, but with precision, measuring distance, timing, patterns. Every passerby was a variable. Every movement had meaning. It had kept him alive for years. She didn't belong to that kind of thinking. She appeared suddenly, running down the street, holding a stack of papers under her coat. She was too fast for the weather, too careless for the slick pavement. When she slipped, it wasn't dramatic, just a small misstep, but it was enough. The papers scattered into the rain, white turning grey in seconds. She froze. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the mess, as if deciding whether to give up. He moved before he could stop himself. That was the first mistake. He crouched, gathering the papers quickly, shielding them from the water as much as possible. She knelt too, their hands brushing once, briefly. Her skin was warm despite the cold rain. "Thank you," she said, catching her breath. Her voice wasn't suspicious. That struck him immediately. People were usually suspicious. He handed her the last page. She smiled, not out of politeness, but with something real behind it. And just like that, something shifted. They didn't exchange names. They didn't need to. But 2 days later, they met again. The cafe was small, quiet, and unremarkable. Exactly the kind of place he usually avoided. Too many people. Too many eyes. Too many chances for something to go wrong. But he needed somewhere to wait. And there she was. Sitting by the window, reading, completely absorbed. The rain tapped softly against the glass, but she didn't seem to notice. When she looked up and saw him, recognition came instantly. "You're the one from the rain," she said. "And you're the one who nearly lost a war with gravity," he replied. She laughed. That sound stayed with him longer than it should have. Her name was Elena. She studied literature. She loved stories about transformation, people who changed their lives, who escaped their pasts, who became something else. He found that almost ironic. He told her his name was Daniel. It wasn't. His real life existed beneath the surface. He wasn't the kind of criminal people imagined. There were no weapons, no dramatic chases, no visible violence. His work lived in quiet systems, in financial shadows, encrypted messages, invisible exchanges. He connected people who weren't supposed to be connected. He moved things that weren't supposed to move. Money, information, identities. He told himself it was just business. He told himself he wasn't hurting anyone directly. But the truth was simpler. He had stopped asking what came after. Elena asked questions. Not the kind meant to expose, but the kind that made silence uncomfortable. "What do you want?" she asked once. He gave the only answer he had. "Stability." She tilted her head slightly. "That's not really a destination. That's more like a condition." He didn't respond. Because he didn't know how to explain that his entire life was built to avoid collapse. Time passed in small, quiet moments. Coffee turned into walks. Walks turned into long conversations. Conversations turned into something neither of them named. She noticed things. "You don't relax," she said one evening as they walked along the river. "I do." "No," she replied gently. "You pause." "That's different." He almost smiled. Almost. The first crack appeared where he didn't expect it. A deal went wrong. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But enough. Money went missing. A connection broke. Someone started asking questions. And in his world, questions were dangerous. He felt it immediately. The shift. The subtle tension. The way conversations changed tone. The way people looked at him a second longer than necessary. Suspicion didn't need proof. It only needed space. That night, he didn't sleep. For the first time in years, he thought about consequences, not as abstract possibilities, but as something real. He thought about Elena, about her trust, about the way she looked at him like he was normal. He realized something then. If everything fell apart, she wouldn't just lose him. She would learn who he really was. And that, somehow, felt worse. "So leave," she said the next day, as if it was simple. He hadn't told her everything. Not yet. But he had told her enough. "You don't understand," he replied. "Then help me understand. You can't just walk away from something like that." She held his gaze. "People walk away from worse. That's not how this works." "No," she said quietly. "That's how you've decided it works." The idea stayed. It grew. It irritated him, then unsettled him, then refused to leave. Leave. It sounded impossible. But impossible things sometimes happen when there's nothing left to lose. He didn't leave all at once. He dismantled his life the way he had built it, carefully, deliberately. He closed channels, delayed responses, shifted attention. He created distance without making it obvious. It was dangerous. At any moment, someone could notice. At any moment, everything could collapse. And then, it almost did. A name surfaced. Not his, but close enough to be connected. An investigation started quietly, then grew louder. People disappeared. Messages stopped. Lines went silent. And suddenly, he wasn't invisible anymore. "You need to go," one of his contacts told him. Now, he understood what that meant. Not leaving the work. Leaving everything. That night, he went to Elena. She opened the door, saw his face, and didn't ask questions. "Something happened," she said. "Yes." "Are you in danger?" He hesitated. "Yes." She stepped aside. "Come in." He told her everything. Not fragments. Not softened versions. The truth. Who he was. What he had done. What was happening now. When he finished, the silence felt unbearable. "I understand if you want me to leave," he said. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "No." Just that. No anger. No fear. No hesitation. Just a decision. They had one night. One night before everything caught up. "Will they find you?" She asked quietly. "Probably." "And if they do?" He didn't answer. Because they both knew. The next day, the city felt different. Too quiet. Too still. Like something was waiting. They walked by the river again. Same place. Same path. But nothing was the same. "I used to think change was simple," Elena said. "And now, I think it costs something." He nodded. "It does." She looked at him. Was it worth it? He didn't hesitate. Yes. They heard the sirens before they saw anything. Distant. Then closer. Then unmistakable. "It's time," he said. She grabbed his hand. "No. You know this was coming. There has to be another way." There isn't. The truth was brutal in its simplicity. He could run. But not forever. And if he ran, they would follow. And if they followed, they would find her. "I won't let them take you," she said. He almost smiled. "You don't get a choice in that." The sirens stopped. Too close. He stepped back. "You need to go. I'm not leaving you. You have to." "No." For a moment, everything stood still. Then he made the only decision he had left. "I never told them about you," he said. "And I won't." Her expression changed. She understood. "Daniel, that's not my name," he said quietly. Footsteps. Voices. Closing in. "I love you," she said suddenly, as if the words had been waiting. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. "I know." That was the last thing they said to each other. He stepped away from her. Into the open. Into the inevitable. When they took him, he didn't resist. There was no point. From a distance, Elena watched. Hidden. Safe. Unknown. He had avoided punishment for years. Escaped consequences. Outrun the past. But not this time. And somehow, that made it right. Because this time, it wasn't about escaping. It was about choosing. And he chose her. Even if it meant losing everything else. Years later, she would still walk by that river. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes with a book in her hands. And sometimes, when it rained, she would stop, close her eyes, and remember the moment everything began. Not as a tragedy, but as proof that even in the darkest lives, something real can still be found. And sometimes, it's enough to change everything, even if it doesn't save you. There was no resistance, no sudden movement, no desperate attempt to break free. For years, his entire existence had been built on avoiding this exact moment, on slipping past consequences, on staying just outside the reach of those who asked too many questions. And now that it had finally arrived, it felt strangely quiet, almost inevitable. They pushed him into the car, the door closing with a dull, final sound that seemed louder than any siren. Through the tinted glass, the world blurred. Buildings stretched into indistinct shapes, people became shadows. Somewhere behind all of that, Elena remained, hidden, untouched, alive. That was the only part that mattered. The interrogation room was smaller than he expected. He had imagined something harsher, colder, more theatrical. But it was just a plain space, 4 walls, a table, 2 chairs, a light that hummed faintly overhead. The simplicity made it worse. There was nowhere for the mind to hide. Across from him sat a man who didn't introduce himself. "You've been difficult to find," the man said calmly. Daniel, because that was still the name he was holding onto, said nothing. The man slid a thin folder across the table. It wasn't thick. That was the unsettling part. "We don't need everything," he continued. "Just enough." Daniel glanced at the folder but didn't open it. Enough for what? For this to end efficiently. A pause. "You've been careful," the man added. "Smarter than most. But not invisible." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Then why am I here?" A faint smile. "Because you decided to stop." That landed harder than any accusation. Not because it was wrong, but because it was true. Patterns had changed. Movements had slowed. Connections had weakened. In a world built on consistency, deviation was a signal. He hadn't been caught because of what he did. He had been caught because of what he stopped doing. "Who else is involved?" the man asked. Daniel didn't answer. The silence stretched. "You know how this works," the man continued, his tone still controlled, almost indifferent. "You give us names. You help us understand the network. In return, things become easier." "Easier?" Daniel almost laughed. "There is no easy version of this," he said quietly. The man watched him for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "No," he agreed. "But there are worse ones." Time lost its structure after that. Questions repeated in different forms. Details probed from different angles. Names tested. Reactions observed. Daniel remained consistent. Not because he was fearless, but because he had already made his decision. Days passed. Or maybe weeks. It became difficult to tell. At some point, a new piece was introduced. A photograph. It was placed on the table without a word. He didn't need to look at it to know who it was. But he did anyway. Elena. Walking along the river. Alone. His chest tightened, just slightly. It was the first real reaction he had allowed himself. The man across from him noticed. "Interesting," he said softly. Daniel's voice was steady when he spoke. "You said you didn't have everything." "We don't," the man replied. "But we have enough to ask the right questions." "She's not involved." "That's what you say." "It's the truth." Another pause. Then, almost casually, "Truth is useful, but only when it can be verified." For the first time since his arrest, Daniel felt something close to fear. Not for himself. For her. That night, if it was night, he sat alone in the dim cell, staring at the wall. He had spent years believing he could control outcomes. That if he calculated well enough, moved carefully enough, he could always stay ahead. But control had limits. And now he had reached them. The next interrogation came sooner. This time, the tone was different. Less patient. "We can protect her," the man said. "Or we can investigate her. That depends on you." Daniel looked up slowly. "You already know she's not part of this. We know what you've told us." "That's not the same thing." "What do you want?" A simple answer. "Everything." There it was. The real choice. Not between guilt and innocence. Not between freedom and punishment, but between betrayal and sacrifice. He thought of Elena, of the calf, of the rain, of the way she had said no without hesitation, of the way she believed people could choose differently. "You think this is about justice?" Daniel said quietly. The man didn't respond. "It's not," Daniel continued. "It's about control, information, leverage. And you had no part in that?" the man asked. Daniel held his gaze. "I did. A beat. And now?" Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Now I'm done." The man studied him carefully. "You're not in a position to be done," Daniel shook his head. "No. But I'm in a position to choose." Silence. Then, "Final time," the man said. "Names." Daniel exhaled slowly. And then he spoke. Not names. Not connections. Not networks. He told them everything about himself. Every detail. Every action. Every transaction he could reconstruct. He gave them a complete map of his own involvement. Precise. Structured. Undeniable. But he gave them nothing else. At first, it seemed like defiance. Then it became something else. Something harder to break. Because he wasn't resisting. He was cooperating, on his own terms. Weeks turned into months. The case built itself around him. Solid. Contained. Complete enough to close. Incomplete enough to leave questions. Elena was never called in. Never questioned. Never officially connected. One day, the man returned. No folder this time. "It's done," he said. Daniel didn't ask what that meant. "You could have made this easier," the man added. Daniel nodded slightly. "I know. Why didn't you?" For the first time, Daniel allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Because some things shouldn't be paid for by someone else." The man watched him for a long moment, then gave a short nod. Not approval, but something close to understanding. The sentence came later. Years. Not the worst possible, but not light. The day they moved him, the sky was grey again. Not storming, just heavy. As the vehicle passed along the river road, he turned his head slightly. And there, just for a second, he saw her. Standing by the water. Still. Unmoving. She didn't wave. Didn't run. Didn't call out. But she was there. And that was enough. He closed his eyes. Not to escape, but to hold that image as something real. Something earned. He had spent years avoiding consequences, escaping outcomes, outrunning truth. But in the end, he didn't escape punishment. He chose it. And in that choice, for the first time in his life, he was free. Years later, when the city had changed and the rain no longer felt the same, Elena still walked by the river. She had learned to live with absence, the kind that doesn't fade but becomes part of you. Sometimes she would stop and look at the water, remembering not the end, but the beginning, how something real had once found its way into a life built on shadows. Far away, behind walls and routines, he carried the same memory. Not as regret, but as proof that he had once made a different choice, and meant it. They did not meet again. But the life they changed in each other never returned to what it had been before. And somehow, that was the truest ending they could have had.